You're watching 22 News in Focus. We just spent the last half hour talking to outgoing Lieutenant Governor Tim Murray about his early resignation. The governor has lost a number of cabinet members over the last few months, as this is the last year and a half of the Patrick administration. Joining us now to talk about some of these big changes that are happening and how this may affect us, we have Clinton State Representative Harold Naughton and we have Chicopee State Representative Joe Wagner. I want to thank you both so much for joining us on our program today. First of all, what are you thinking about what's going on in Beacon Hill? Obviously, this is an interesting time for our state. As the governor announced he's not running, Lieutenant Governor is out the door, and we've lost a number of cabinet members as well. Some people are a little concerned that things aren't going to happen.
Well, this is a part of how public service works, particularly at the highest levels where people run for and may serve as governor and lieutenant governor. And so there's if you look at it over a number of years, it's a constant state of transition. Sometimes that transition happens after 4 years, sometimes after 8 years, as is the case with the governor. The lieutenant governor, something just short of 8 years. I remember, and Hank and I both served back in the late 90s when Bill Weld stepped aside before completing his second term. Paul Cellucci served as acting governor until he was elected on his own, and he then left before serving one complete term. And so there was a good deal of transition back during that period, and so this is, you know, but our job in public service, and we in the legislature, our job is to just do the job, and we deal with those things as they come up.
It's the nature of electoral office. People move up, they move on. For those of us from central Massachusetts, which I feel there's a big bond with Western Massachusetts, because you talk to a lot of Boston people and they'll always say, oh, all you guys from Western Massachusetts, lumping us all together. The leaving of the lieutenant governor is we consider it a big personal loss. He was really, we had a lot of pride in him being from central Massachusetts, from Worcester County, and the great work he did on veterans, a thing obviously very special to me, security infrastructure, science and technology education, housing and homelessness as part of his portfolio were very important. But that being said, the governor's got a pretty deep team there, as well as great support and great people within the legislature to provide support for those initiatives. So it's the nature of our democracy, going back to the beginning of the Republic. We're always prepared to move on, and we always need to be. And I think we've got a good setup here in Massachusetts that we can carry on, and we'll continue accomplishing very positive things for the entire Commonwealth. You know,
it is about 18 months at least, you know, that we're going to have this sort of missing person there. Massachusetts does not have a process, as we were talking about, to fulfill that seat. Of course, Lieutenant Governor, it's not his responsibility at this point to deal with that. Do you think that we're going to make some sort of change to that law and actually see a Lieutenant Governor in there throughout the next 18 months, or what do you think?
Well, I'm not sure that I see that in the short term. I think some of the issues that the Lieutenant Governor spoke to are front and center for us in the legislature, reconciling the state budget, which has recently been, different versions have been passed by both the House and Senate, and we've got the end of the fiscal year and the beginning of the next fiscal year on July 1 at hand, so that is priority one. The transportation finance measure that the Lieutenant Governor made reference to is right there with the state budget, and in fact some of what we hope to do in the state budget is predicated on the successful passage and signing into law of a transportation finance measure. And so, you know, those things are out there. I think where we're going to miss Lieutenant Governor, Hank spoke to it when he talked about the bond between central and western Massachusetts. You know, so much down on the Hill is Boston-centric, and so I'm sure Hank in Central Mass, as we in Western Mass have to do, we bond together pretty well as a legislative delegation, and we understand that there is strength in numbers. But what we're going to miss with Tim Murray is the fact that he was a city and town guy, and serving on the city council in Worcester and then serving as mayor. And he and the governor both, more than any administration in my 22 years in office, have crisscrossed this state day in and day out like no governor and lieutenant governor I have ever seen. And so what we're, in the short term, we've got to fill the void that's going to be left because a big voice and a big advocate for cities and towns will not be there on a day in and day out basis. That having been said, the appointments that the lieutenant governor and the governor announced yesterday, handing off of some of the responsibilities that directly impact cities and towns, they've been handed off to capable people in the administration Our job, I think, as legislators is to make sure that those folks serve as points of contact for us each and every day.
To serve that check and balance mechanism that the founders provided, and which you often find, and where the Lieutenant Governor was such an assistance, is it's often a clash of cultures between those of us from this part of the state and those of us, from the Boston area. And the quick example I'll use is we suffered an awful death of a call firefighter in my district a few years ago. We found out there was a hole in the pension law, that there was no death benefit for his family. And it took me a couple of years to convince our Boston colleagues about that. We need this. It took me 2 years to get that passed, because these more urban-centric people in that part of the state just couldn't grasp the concept of why a volunteer would run into a burning house. And so it's issues like that we have to, working together with Representative Wagner, myself, the Lieutenant Governor, the whole delegation from west of Route 495, and educating our Boston colleagues, both in the administration and really some of our colleagues in the legislature.
And I don't like to pay attention to rumors, but Rep. Narn, it has been rumored that you may be interested in the position of Lieutenant Governor in the future. Would you mind addressing that?
Well, could I speak to that rumor?
Oh, sure.
I will not be a candidate.
Well, that's one guy. You know, I appreciate that, and it's
for that office.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, we would at least keep you where you are, Joe. If not,
I will likely be a candidate for that office.
That's great of you to ask, and I think it's driven a lot by the fact that I have been traveling around the state, having roundtables and on a listening tour on gun violence. 65 different pieces of legislation were filed after Newtown, all of which came to my committee that I chair, the Committee on Public Safety and Homeland Security. And that's going to be an overall, a very comprehensive gun violence, violence prevention, gun safety piece of legislation that I have to work on over the next 4 months. And that's what I'm concentrating on right now, putting through a thoughtful, deliberate, debated piece to come out of my committee to put in front of the House for debate before the end of this calendar year. I think I owe that to my colleagues in the House, to the people of my district in the Commonwealth, to the Speaker who asked me to take on this task. And so that's actually why I've been spending a lot of time out here in Western Massachusetts these past few weeks, as I did a couple of years ago when I was here in this capacity during the tornadoes. What happens after that? Well, we'll look and see. I mean, often in life, when you join the Army, when you become a lawyer, when you start a family, when you run for office, you look to be part of something bigger than yourself. And as we walk through this life, try to make it a little bit better for those around us. So we'll look at opportunities that come up at that point. But right now, my job is to look at and try to make the streets and the neighborhoods and the cities and the towns of our Commonwealth a little bit safer as we move forward. If other opportunities present themselves over the next few months, we'll certainly take a close look at them.
So that wasn't quite a yes or no, but I guess stay tuned and we'll see what happens.
Well, I think I think the Lieutenant Governor has done a tremendous job in that office and set a tone for what can be done with that office.
We were actually just taking a look at video from when you were in Chicopee for that gun violence tour. You were there as well. What are you hearing as you take this tour? I mean, obviously this is a very controversial issue.
Sure
many people, there are many people who want to know that their guns aren't going to be taken away from them. And then there are many more people who feel that there's a safety factor that needs to be. So there are big groups of people who feel very passionate one way or the other. What kind of legislation is this that you think that we're going to be putting together?
You've just done a very good job of encapsulating what a difficult job we have in front of us. I'm a firm believer in the Second Amendment. We don't want to affect anyone's civil liberties here as we go forward. And Massachusetts already has some pretty stringent laws as far as gun possession and firearm ownership is concerned. What we want to do is take a look at numerous aspects: school safety, mental health, and the access of the criminally mentally ill to firearms. What do we do to prevent that? Because as we all know, as I've heard at many of these these hearings and the listening tour around the state, a lot of these crimes that are committed are with unlicensed weapons. Not a lot we can do about licensing weapons like that, but can we prevent their import into the Commonwealth? I've heard that there's some flowing in this part of the state. There's some flowing down from Vermont. How do we stem that tide of illegal firearms coming into the Commonwealth? And then safety, teaching firearm safety to our young people in the schools, in private programs run by fish and game organizations throughout the Commonwealth. And then I've gotten a lot of testimony, a lot of complaints that there's issues with the issuance of licenses to carry around the Commonwealth, that from one city or town to the next, someone might be able to get one very easily, and in the next town it's very hard for them because of the discretion given to our police chiefs. I think that ties into background checks that they were unable to accomplish on the national level. I think if we can tie some uniformity in the issuances of licenses to carry in with some more stringent background checks, I think we've accomplished something there. So we're trying to balance, and out here in Springfield, in Western Massachusetts, you've got Smith & Wesson, which I toured last week. That is a tremendous economic driver out here, and they want to stay here. And they tell me they've been courted by southern states and other states that claim to be more friendly towards firearm owners, but they're an impressive outfit over there. I met people that have worked there for 45 years. A woman and her husband was there for 44 years, and their son has been there for 20-odd years, and a brother-in-law. It's really in the old school form, a very family-oriented business. We don't want to do anything that's going to impact that economic powerhouse here in Western Massachusetts. So you can see we've got quite a job in front of us over the next 4 months, balancing all of those stakeholders and all of those issues. But I think with fair and deliberate debate and discussion and discourse, we can come out with a very balanced piece that will provide for public safety, provide for people feeling secure in their homes and sending their kids off to school, while at the same time protecting civil liberties.
And of course in Western Mass we've seen a number of instances, and one in Chicopee as well last year with the stand-up. Is there anything that you would like to see in this that sort of caters to what we've experienced in Western Massachusetts?
Well, I think Hank outlined the issues pretty well, and it's striking an appropriate balance between recognizing constitutionally the right of people to bear arms and to do it responsibly, and also having an obligation as public policy makers to make sure that the public is safe, and that we have and that we establish strong policies that keep people safe on the streets and in schools and in public places. And we have seen a proliferation of violence that involves guns. And as Representative Naughton said, Chairman Naughton, many of those guns are not legally registered guns. And the problems in urban areas, I'm sure you're finding as you go around the state, are different than the problems in rural areas. And some of these things, might appear to be anomalies. The incident in Chicopee a year ago. But you have so many of them together, and they are so similar in terms of how they play out and in the things in which they're rooted, that it causes us, when you get beyond the shock factor, to have to determine what, in terms of policy, is the best way to proceed to ensure that the public is safe, but that people have the right to legally own and operate firearms.
Okay,
and there it is.
Yeah, very quickly, before we switch topics, you had said this 65 pieces of legislation after Newtown. When do you think we could see something actually happen?
We're having a hearing that we'll announce the date shortly. We're doing 5 statewide hearings, and we are doing one in Springfield. We'll have the date very shortly. And we're working with Mayor Sarno's office to find a facility to hold that hearing at. And I think by September, we will have a piece of legislation that will go to the floor of the House and be debated by the end of the session this year.
Very good.
And the Speaker, by the way, in his state of the state address was very clear that this issue was primary for him in this session.
Very good. We will continue this conversation. There are a lot more topics to talk about, a lot happening here in Western Mass. So stay with us. You're watching 22 News in Focus.